Mary Ellen Harper was 62, widowed, and lonely when she met 23-year-old Jaden Cruz online, a handsome, charming fitness coach who called her his soulmate. What began as an unlikely digital romance quickly spiraled into a twisted nightmare of lies, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. By the time Mary Ellen boarded a flight to Florida to finally meet the man of her dreams, she had unknowingly stepped into a trap designed to exploit, silence, and destroy. At first, it was just to keep up with her grandchildren's school photos. Then it became a way to pass the time. Facebook groups for seniors, forums about grief recovery, and eventually a few casual dating sites. She wasn't looking for love, not exactly. But late at night, the loneliness crept in. Her house, once full of noise and life, had grown painfully quiet. She hadn't felt desired since before her husband fell ill. The thought of being wanted, truly wanted, stirred something long dormant inside her. She was thrilled, nervous, but excited. He claimed he booked a flight, but missed it after a friend stole money from him. She feared judgment. Her daughter would have laughed or scolded her. Her son barely called as it was. This was hers, her decision, her adventure. Jaden gave her an address in Homestead, a suburb south of Miami, and said he couldn't wait to finally hold her in his arms. She packed her best clothes, a few framed photos to show him, and left her quiet Iowa life behind. Then he said he was robbed and needed money for a new ticket. The sun set, and the room grew darker. A creeping sense of fear began to rise. Still, she clung to hope. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe he would walk through the door with flowers and a smile. Eventually, Mary Ellen offered to come to him instead. The charming young man who once called her his soulmate had vanished into silence. She had never been to Florida, and the thought of meeting Jaden under the palm trees, of starting a new chapter with someone who made her feel alive again, was irresistible. Jaden's words gave her permission to believe she could still be loved. He asked her to send him photos too. At first, she was shy, sending modest selfies of her in her garden or with her cat. She wore a light blue blouse, silver earrings, and perfume she hadn't used in years. He introduced himself as Lise and said he was Jaden's friend. Eventually, he stopped in front of a small apartment building with peeling paint and rusted balconies. He led her inside and told her to wait. Jaden would arrive soon. The apartment smelled stale, like mildew and old smoke. There was barely any furniture. Lise left, locking the door behind him. Jaden had sent him because he was dealing with an emergency but would meet her later. Mary Ellen, though disappointed, decided to go with him. She didn't want to seem paranoid or ungrateful. At the baggage claim, she waited for Jaden to appear. She scanned the crowd, looking for his bright green eyes. But he didn't show. He always responded with affection, telling her she was radiant. On one such night, she received a friend request from someone named Jaden Cruz. She sent the money without hesitation. A week later, he said he couldn't pay rent and risked getting evicted. Mary Ellen Harper had lived in the same modest house in Ames, Iowa, for over 3 decades. His bio was brief. Fitness coach. Passionate about health, spirituality, and real connections. She almost ignored the request, thinking it must have been a mistake. But curiosity got the better of her. She clicked accept. Minutes later, he messaged her. He said her profile photo, one taken at her retirement party, had a beautiful smile. She hesitated but responded with a polite thank you. The room still held the scent of her late husband's aftershave, even 6 years after he passed away from pancreatic cancer. The walls were lined with framed photos of her 2 grown children, and the porch had the same creaky floorboard she used to warn the grandkids about. Life had grown still for her. Most days were spent knitting, reading books from the library, and watching old game shows with a lukewarm cup of tea. At 62, Mary Ellen never imagined her life would suddenly take such an unexpected turn. Her introduction to the digital world had been slow and cautious. Jaden's profile picture showed a young, tan man with striking green eyes and a muscular frame. That single reply opened the door to something she couldn't have foreseen. Jaden messaged her daily. At first, it was light conversation, asking how her day had gone, complimenting her wisdom, saying he admired older women for their experience and calm. He told her his own life had been full of betrayal and fake friends. He claimed he was searching for something real, something deep. He said he felt an immediate connection with her. Mary Ellen laughed at the idea at first. A man 40 years younger, surely it was some kind of joke. But he insisted age meant nothing to him. Over the next few weeks, Mary Ellen began waking up with anticipation, checking her phone even before she made her morning coffee. Jaden sent selfies from the gym, video clips of him jogging on the beach, and even voice messages calling her his angel. He wrote long texts describing his childhood, how he had lost his parents young and learned to survive on his own. He said he found her presence healing. He made her feel needed. The routine of chatting with Jaden became more than just a habit. It was her emotional lifeline. Then the requests for help began. First, it was small. He said he missed a shift at work because his car broke down and needed $300 to fix it. At one point, Jaden said he wanted to fly out to meet her in Iowa. She booked a one-way flight to Miami, telling no one in her family. The flight was smooth. As the plane descended over the glistening Florida coast, she looked out the window and smiled, convinced she was flying toward love. After 20 minutes, a man approached her. He was in his mid-20s, wearing sunglasses and holding a cardboard sign with her name. Luis drove her through unfamiliar streets, past neighborhoods that grew rougher with each turn. She sat on the couch with her suitcase beside her. Minutes turned into hours. She texted Jaden repeatedly. No answer. But by midnight, her phone calls went straight to voicemail. Mary Ellen woke up on the stiff couch, her back aching and her mouth dry. The dim morning light filtered through the thin curtains, and for a moment she forgot where she was. The unfamiliar apartment smelled faintly of sour food and mildew. Her phone, still clutched in her hand, had no new messages. She checked again, hoping for a reply from Jaden, but there was nothing. Her stomach sank. She stood up slowly and looked around the room. There was no television remote, no food in the kitchen, and the bedroom door was slightly ajar, revealing a bare mattress on the floor. She didn't know who to call. She felt foolish and humiliated. She hadn't told anyone she was traveling to Florida. He was calm, patient, and spoke gently. As she recounted her story, she saw his expression harden. He had heard similar stories before. Older women, often widowed or isolated, contacted by much younger men online, showered with affection, then drained of money and sometimes worse. She hadn't shared details about Jaden with her children. Now she was alone, broke, and afraid. "You should have used the safe," he muttered, not even looking up from his magazine. Her suitcase sat untouched by the couch. She called Jaden's number again, straight to voicemail. She tried texting, still no response. Officers arrived, took another report, and dusted the room for prints. She had no money, barely any food, and her phone battery was dying. When a call finally came in, it wasn't from Jaden. It was from her daughter, Christine. But they warned her there wasn't much they could do immediately. The damage had been done. Whoever targeted her was likely long gone. She received a call from Mary Ellen's bank about suspicious activity, but Mary Ellen refused. She told her daughter there was something wrong, something deeper going on. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like someone was watching her, like someone was still waiting for her to let her guard down again. Concerned, she called the Ames Police Department and learned Mary Ellen had boarded a flight to Florida. Now, in full panic mode, Christine began calling motels and police departments across Miami until someone confirmed Mary Ellen's name on a report. She was supposed to be a mature, careful woman. Her voice trembled as she told the officer on duty that she believed she had been scammed. The young man behind the glass window listened, took her name, and handed her a clipboard. She filled out a basic report, trying to remember every detail about Jaden, his supposed job, the pictures he sent, the things he had told her. She had become a pawn in a game that involved more than just sweet words and fake photos. And now that she was out of their grasp, someone out there might want to make sure she stayed silent forever. Instead, she had followed the sweet promises of a stranger into a nightmare. The address Jaden gave her didn't appear to be his home. As he reviewed the documents, he told her the photos Jaden had sent were likely stolen from someone else's social media. He suspected the man never existed, at least not in the way she believed. The driver dropped her off at a place with flickering neon signs and cracked pavement. The receptionist barely looked up when she paid for a 2-night stay in cash. The room smelled like cheap air freshener trying to cover something worse. Still, it felt safer than that empty apartment. Most online scams didn't involve meeting the victim in person. Her suitcase was unzipped, her wallet was missing. So was her credit card and the phone charger she left on the nightstand. She hadn't locked the door when she left earlier. She hadn't thought she needed to. The fact that someone had actually picked her up from the airport, taken her to an apartment, and disappeared made it different, riskier, more dangerous. She thought about going to the police, but she didn't know what to say. She didn't even know if a crime had been committed. Maybe he had an emergency. Maybe he was in trouble. The thought that something bad had happened to him still seemed more believable to her than the possibility that she had been tricked. As the hours passed, her anxiety grew. She stepped outside the apartment, unsure of what she was even looking for. The building was quiet, run down, and eerily lifeless. Nothing. Her heart raced every time she refreshed her messages. Later that evening, she tried ordering food, only to realize her debit card was being declined. She checked her banking app. Her account balance had dropped dramatically. Over $12,000 was missing, all within the past few days. There were ATM withdrawals and purchases from stores she'd never heard of. A few cars were parked in the lot, but no one was around. She knocked on the door across the hall. A woman in her 50s answered with a cigarette in her mouth and tired eyes. When Mary Ellen asked if she knew Jaden Cruz, the woman shook her head and closed the door. Mary Ellen began to realize she had no idea where she really was. By noon, she called a taxi and asked to be taken to the nearest motel. She showered, changed clothes, and tried calling Jaden again. Panic overtook her. She tried calling her daughter, Christine, in Wisconsin, but hung up before the phone could ring. How could she explain any of this? The next morning, she went to the nearest police station. A detective named Rafael Dominguez eventually sat down with her. Detective Dominguez asked for screenshots, transaction receipts, and the email and phone number Jaden used. Mary Ellen handed over everything she had. Still, something about her case didn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen checked back into the motel and waited. That night, when she returned to her room, she found the door slightly open. She went back to the front desk in a panic, but the clerk just shrugged. Now terrified, Mary Ellen called the police again. In the following days, Mary Ellen stayed in the motel, too scared to leave. Christine had noticed her mother hadn't replied to any messages in days. The reunion over the phone was emotional. Christine cried, begged her mother to come home, and promised to book her a return flight immediately. Mary Ellen's instincts were sharper than she realized. She had stumbled into something much darker than an online scam, something criminal, something organized. Detective Rafael Dominguez sat in his dimly lit office, a stack of similar cases already on his desk. But something about Mary Ellen Harper's story stuck with him. Most victims of romance scams never met their perpetrators in person. They sent money, got ghosted, and eventually moved on in silence. But Mary Ellen had traveled across the country, been picked up by a man she didn't know, and left in a shady apartment. Then she was robbed. It was bolder, messier, and riskier than the typical scam. It meant someone local was involved, someone reckless or desperate, and occasionally a small apartment complex that Mary Ellen confirmed as the place she had been taken to. The cash transfers Mary Ellen had sent, over $12,000, had gone into several online payment accounts, mostly under fake names, but eventually converged into a real bank account under Dante Morales. That was the breakthrough. A subpoena allowed access to the transaction history, showing multiple deposits over the last few months, each from different women across the country. Small-town names, middle-aged senders, and suspiciously similar descriptions in the notes: for plane ticket, for phone bill, love you always. But the unit was now empty, vacated the same day Mary Ellen had checked into her motel. One message mentioned a hotel number and clearing it out. These men were mobile and reckless, and the fact that they derobbed and left Mary Ellen alive was a loose end they may have wanted to tie up. Security footage from the motel Mary Ellen had checked into showed a man, confirmed to be Alejandro, returning to the premises 2 nights after she filed her report. He approached her room, looked around, then entered with a key. He was inside for approximately 8 minutes. When he left, he appeared to be holding something wrapped in a towel, possibly her missing wallet and cards. He sent out alerts to regional law enforcement and reviewed missing person reports connected to elderly women in neighboring states. All that remained was the raw truth. She had walked straight into a trap crafted with emojis, compliments, and a false sense of security. And if not for her persistence and a few caring strangers, she might never have made it back to tell her story. Another reference to payment from the Illinois woman, showing the scam was still ongoing even after Mary Ellen's disappearance from their lives. No forwarding address, no leaseholder on record, just a shell used to keep her contained. The realization that she had nearly been silenced, used, and possibly killed weighed heavily on her. The betrayal broke something inside her that trust could never fix again. She gave a full statement, provided every detail she remembered, and agreed to testify if the men were ever caught. Dominguez suspected they weren't just trying to rob her but to monitor her next steps. Dante and Alejandro had likely crossed state lines, continuing their scheme elsewhere. Dominguez forwarded the case to Texas authorities and coordinated with cybercrime units to trace their online activity. The hunt was now multi-jurisdictional. She had escaped, but barely. Dominguez requested surveillance footage from the Miami airport on the day Mary Ellen arrived. The facility manager confirmed that the unit had been accessed 2 days earlier. With a warrant, officers opened the unit. Inside, among boxes of clothes and electronics, was a medium-sized blue suitcase. Inside the suitcase was Mary Ellen's hand-knit shawl, several items of clothing she described packing, and a photo album, her photo album. It was unmistakable, filled with old pictures of her children, her late husband, and her grandkids. After hours of footage review, he located her dressed in a light blue blouse, dragging her suitcase. Some never reported it. Some may still believe they're in a relationship. But only Mary Ellen had traveled to meet him. That made her a liability. The system returned a possible match. Alejandro Perez, age 27, with a criminal record that included petty theft, drug charges, and a fraud investigation that never led to conviction. But there was no trace of them in Homestead. They'd likely moved on. Then an anonymous tip came through the department's hotline. A woman said she recognized Alejandro from a photo shown in a local news segment about a different romance scam. She claimed he had stayed with her cousin in Hialeah a few weeks ago and might still be in the area. She gave Dominguez an address for a storage unit rented under the name Liz Alvarez. The name wasn't familiar in any active investigations, but it raised a flag. She answered every question carefully, recounted every conversation, and provided all the texts and money transfer details she still had. The photos of Jaden matched an Instagram model based in Brazil, confirming that the identity was fake. Dominguez dug deeper into Alejandro's known associates and found a name that appeared multiple times, Dante Morales. A man approached her near baggage claim. He was tall, Hispanic, mid-20s, wearing sunglasses and a chain. He had no fixed address, frequently moved between cheap rentals, and often used burner phones. Dominguez theorized that Dante was the real Jaden Cruz. The online profile was likely a fabrication built with stolen images and a fake name, with Alejandro handling the physical side, meeting victims, escorting them, keeping them isolated. He carried no sign, but he clearly spoke to her, nodded, then guided her toward the parking lot. Dominguez pulled still frames and sent them to facial recognition databases. Dante, 26, had a longer sheet, fraud, identity theft, and connections to a group suspected of running romance scams across Florida and Texas. Dominguez called Mary Ellen in her motel room. She was startled but grateful that someone believed her. The detective reached out to digital forensics. The IP addresses used by Jaden, traced back to public Wi-Fi networks near Homestead Dominguez, followed the money trail. It wasn't just Mary Ellen. There were at least 6 other victims, all over 55, all conned by the same online persona. Dominguez issued a bolo be on the lookout for both Dante and Alejandro. The detective drove out personally. There were also several burner phones, one of which contained messages between Dante and Alejandro discussing the old lady and moving her before the heat comes. Dominguez knew time was running out. Then came the most chilling discovery. Why return unless he wanted to ensure she hadn't left evidence? Why take only certain items? After cross-referencing the burner phone numbers with call records from the storage unit, investigators tracked the latest ping to a location near Houston, Texas. As all this unfolded, Mary Ellen remained in Florida under police protection. The digital fantasy that once filled her lonely days had shattered completely. The motel where Mary Ellen had stayed, just outside of Homestead, was not the kind of place where people asked questions. It was cheap, poorly lit, and frequented by guests who kept their heads down and paid in cash. A small dark stain on the bathroom tile caught her eye. When she leaned in closer, she saw a smear of what looked like dried blood. Mary Ellen had been targeted for more than just a scam. He stayed for approximately 15 minutes and left with a trash bag. The vehicle had been purchased a week earlier by a woman using fake ID documents, but security footage at the dealership showed Dante Morales inspecting the car and handing over the cash. Then, a local tow yard reported impounding a black Nissan abandoned near a gas station outside Hialeah. Mary Ellen's stolen debit card had been used 3 times after she was robbed. Once at a convenience store in Miami Gardens, once at an ATM in Fort Lauderdale, and once to book a short-term rental through a vacation rental app. That rental, a small guest house in Hollywood, Florida, became the next target of the investigation. A fisherman near the Everglades reported something strange, a rolled blue tarp caught on the edge of the riverbank, weighed down with heavy stones. When officers arrived, they unwrapped the tarp and discovered the decomposing body of a woman. It had been in the water for days. Identification was difficult, but a fingerprint confirmed it wasn't Mary Ellen. It was another woman, 68-year-old Irene Callahan from Toledo, Ohio, reported missing 3 weeks earlier. Her daughter had told police she'd been in a relationship with a much younger man online and had traveled to meet him. They targeted women through Facebook, dating apps, and spiritual groups. They used flattery, promises of love, and claims of shared pain. They operated out of low-rent properties and used different accomplices to keep their victims isolated. They stole identities, moved fast, and cut contact when things got risky. She was last seen at a bus station in Fort Lauderdale, and one woman, strong, humiliated, but alive, had brought their darkness into the light. Inside the trunk were chemical wipes, a roll of plastic wrap, and a shovel. Multiple older women had fallen victim to the same online persona. Only now was the scope becoming clear. This wasn't a one-time scam. It was an organized pattern, potentially involving more victims, some of whom hadn't yet been identified. There was no blood, no body, and no fingerprints that led anywhere, but the items painted a grim picture. Dominguez shared everything: the bank transactions, burner phones, burner email accounts, fake social media profiles, vehicle rentals, and more. Agents believed at least 3 other women had vanished under similar circumstances in the last 8 months, though no bodies had been found. She recorded a video statement for investigators and agreed to testify in court. She didn't want other women to fall for the same trap. Her story had become part of something larger, something that had to be stopped. It suggested preparation, perhaps for transporting a victim or disposing of a crime scene. She barely slept, jumped at every sound, and refused to be alone for more than a few minutes at a time. The betrayal was too deep, the fear too fresh. She kept replaying the details in her head, the way Luis or Alejandro had smiled when he picked her up at the airport. The hours she spent waiting in that empty apartment, the texts she had read over and over again. Every word had been a lie. Investigators now had confirmation. Both suspects were working together and still in South Florida at the time. That was the same night a guest on the 3rd floor reported hearing thumping noises from below, but didn't he think to call security. One neighbor had written down a partial license plate number of a different vehicle, a dark-colored Dodge SUV. It was traced to a rental agency at Miami International Airport. The rental contract, once again, was under a fake name, but surveillance footage showed Dante Morales and Alejandro Perez picking up the car together. Dominguez reviewed every frame. Alejandro had worn a hat low over his face and gloves. The trash bag he carried was loaded into the trunk of a black Nissan Altima with temporary Florida plates. She had become a threat to someone who wanted their operation to remain hidden. They had mobility, cash, and a rotating pattern of fake IDs and vehicles. They avoided hotels and preferred short-term rentals, making them harder to track. Still, Dominguez and his team pushed forward, connecting every financial transaction, every security image, and every travel log they could find. The return to the motel wasn't to retrieve personal items. It was to remove evidence, possibly to stage a violent cleanup. Had Mary Ellen stayed in the room one more night, the outcome could have been far more tragic. She backed out of the room and alerted the front desk, who called the police. That's why it took 3 days for anyone to investigate room 106 after Mary Ellen was moved to police protection. Whoever had come back after Mary Ellen left had been in a rush. Under the bed frame, officers found a broken phone charger cord, the same one Mary Ellen said had gone missing. Behind the bathroom mirror, which was loose at one corner, someone had stashed a used pair of latex gloves and a damp rag. Forensics tested the gloves and bathroom tiles. The blood was a match for Mary Ellen Harper. The cleaning staff, used to odd smells and trashed rooms, hesitated before opening the door. When the housekeeper finally entered, what she found didn't make sense. The sheets were gone. The mattress had been flipped. There was a strong smell of bleach and disinfectant that seemed to mask something more pungent underneath. Detective Dominguez returned to the scene immediately. The room had clearly been wiped down, but not with the skill of professionals. The discovery confirmed Dominguez's worst fears. Surveillance footage from the hallway showed Alejandro entering room 106 late at night, just 2 days after Mary Ellen's report was filed. Those plates were traced to a used car dealership in Little Havana. A task force was assembled to locate the vehicle. Days passed without success. At the same time, Dominguez turned his attention to the financial aspect of the case. Police arrived at the house early in the morning. The unit was empty, but neighbors reported seeing 2 men coming and going at odd hours. The operation had expanded. These weren't just petty scammers. Then came the lead that changed everything. The discovery of Irene's body brought the investigation into national focus. The FBI joined the case, creating a multi-agency task force. Mary Ellen was placed into witness protection. She moved to a secure apartment outside Orlando under a false name. The trauma of her experience haunted her. Even from her protected location, she wanted to help. As police dug further into Dante and Alejandro's network, a pattern emerged. But this time, they had left too many traces. The arrest happened early on a Sunday morning in a rundown motel outside of Houston, Texas. U.S. Marshals and FBI agents surrounded the building after tracking a series of online transactions, made using a stolen identity linked to Dante Morales. They moved swiftly, breaching room 211 just after dawn. Inside, Dante and Alejandro were caught off guard. Alejandro tried to flee through the bathroom window but was tackled by agents waiting in the alley behind the motel. Dante, sitting on the edge of the bed with a phone in his hand, didn't resist. She worked with prosecutors to reconstruct the timeline of her experience, providing clear, emotional insight into how the scam worked from the inside. Her voice, cracked with pain but steady with purpose, revealed just how easily a vulnerable person could be drawn into something deadly. News anchors replayed clips of Mary Ellen's video statement, highlighting the growing trend of digital manipulation targeting the elderly. Another from Nevada described a near-identical situation to Mary Ellen's. She had planned to fly to meet him, only canceling last minute due to a medical emergency. Several women, when shown the photos of Dante and Alejandro, wept in court, realizing they had been seduced by lies. In it, Alejandro was seen mocking Mary Ellen behind her back while she waited in the apartment for Jaden to arrive. Both men were sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. She didn't smile at the verdict. There was no joy in it. Only relief. Only silence. What she had endured was still with her, the betrayal, the fear, the shame. She had spoken up not for vengeance, but to prevent it from happening again. The judge, in his closing remarks, called the case one of the most calculated. The porch still creaked. The tea still tasted the same, but something inside her had changed forever. She was no longer the woman who answered a stranger's message out of curiosity. She was something stronger, not unbroken, but unbowed. and cruel schemes he had ever seen, not just for the financial damage it caused, but for the emotional destruction left behind. At night, she still dreamed of that Florida apartment. The empty couch, the silence of unanswered messages, the overwhelming sense that the person she trusted most had never even existed. She had no idea she was being filmed. The laughter, the mocking words, and the cruelty in their voices shocked the courtroom. It destroyed any remaining argument that what happened to Mary Ellen had been a misunderstanding. She appeared in interviews, sharing her story so others wouldn't walk blindly into the same nightmare. She worked with banks and tech companies to improve fraud detection systems and create warning signs for at-risk users. Her pain became her purpose. New profiles, new lies, new traps for the lonely and the hopeful. But because of Mary Ellen, more people saw the signs. More people asked questions, more people survived. Their shame was deep, but their willingness to testify made the case unshakable. Experts discussed the psychology of romance fraud and how isolation, grief, and trust could be used as weapons. How Dante created an ideal online persona, used psychological tricks to draw women in, asked for small favors that grew into massive financial transfers, and encouraged victims to isolate themselves from friends and family. They showed how Alejandro acted as the physical extension of the scam, the one who handled transportation, surveillance, intimidation, and, when necessary, cleanup. On the nightstand beside him were 3 fake IDs, a burner phone, and a notebook filled with passwords and women's names. How Jaden made her feel seen and special after years of loneliness. How the love letters and compliments built into something so intoxicating that she ignored every red flag. She detailed the fear of waiting alone in a strange apartment, the feeling of being watched, the horror of finding her belongings rifled through, and the shock of learning her money had been stolen. And she described the moment she realized that Jaden wasn't a person, he was a performance designed to exploit her from the inside out. Their capture brought months of investigation to a head. Law enforcement had followed a web of fake accounts, fabricated love stories, and stolen money stretching from Florida to Texas, all leading back to these 2 men. In the days following their arrest, investigators uncovered more devices, hidden flash drives. The blue tarp found near the Everglades contained not only Irene's body, but hair and fiber evidence that tied it directly back to Alejandro's car. Forensic analysts also found small blood traces in the trunk, confirming that she had been transported after her death. And a laptop loaded with messages exchanged with dozens of women across the country, all over the age of 55. Many had sent money. Some had planned visits. A few had never been heard from again. In the interrogation room, both men denied everything at first. They claimed they didn't know each other well. They said the women had lied, that they were willing participants. But the evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, financial records, fingerprints, GPS data from their rental cars, and the contents of their phones painted a chilling picture. Messages sent from Dante's account under the name Jaden Cruz were filled with romantic manipulation, carefully crafted lies, and clear patterns of control. Alejandro's texts showed logistical coordination: when to pick up victims, how long to keep them in the apartments, when to change locations, and how to clean up afterward. The charges were vast: wire fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation of the elderly, obstruction of justice, and, in the case of Irene Callahan, murder. Mary Ellen's testimony became a central pillar in the case. She described how the affection started small, like soft ripples on a still lake. The trial drew national attention. Headlines ran stories with phrases like "catfish killers" and "romance scam turned deadly." More victims came forward during the investigation. A woman from Michigan admitted to sending nearly $20,000 to someone she believed was Jaden. In court, the prosecution laid out every step of the scam in painful detail. The most damning moment came when forensic analysts decrypted a backup file from Dante's phone. Inside was a video file labeled "Insurance." The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Mary Ellen sat quietly in the back of the courtroom that day. In the months that followed, she joined an advocacy group aimed at educating seniors about online romance scams. Yet some wounds never healed. The fake name of Jaden Cruz disappeared from the internet, but copycats appeared in his place. She returned to Iowa eventually, to the quiet house where it all began. And though the digital romance that began it all was nothing more than a mask, the courage she found in its aftermath was as real as anything she'd ever known.